everybody. This is my spooky voice. Even though we're not reading spooky things, but welcome to Chilliteracy. Happy Wednesday. How are we all doing? I hope we're all well. I have rain that has just started here, IRL, which is very appropriate. I have the spooky overlay on, as I say, even though we are not reading anything particularly spooky, unless you count the French Revolution to be spooky. I guess it's scary, which I guess you could consider a spooky, but, you know, potato. But yes, welcome in, all you delightful people. Spooky if you're a capitalist, I guess. Yeah, that's true. It was a pretty scary thing to be caught up in. Vive la Révolution! Yes, indeed. Potato pomme de terre. Very good. Good job. Well done. 10 out of 10. Sam did French GCSE, can you tell? Hello, everybody. How are we all doing? I hope we are all well. I'm sorry that you got annoyed at your craft, Lady Mephistopheles. That's always a bit annoying. But yes, hello, Lady Mephistopheles. Hello, Parola. Hello, Llama. Hello, Andy Pants. Who have I missed? Have I missed anyone? No. Hello, Darly Sam. Well, yes. But yes, sorry we weren't around at all last week. Sam didn't stream either, I don't think. Sam has been beset by allergy, as apparently is everybody at the moment. Cold. It is officially cold season. Pigeon on Dave's channel is late yet again. Well, just needs to be on our channel level, because ours is always on time. So I don't actually know what bot he uses for that. He might need to switch. But yes, Sam has been struck down. I believe he is recovering by the cold that everybody's getting at the moment. Not COVID, just cold. Seem to have survived, so no worries for some missed streams. Well, that's good at least. It's really making rounds again. Hello, Salad, welcome in. Yeah, it really is. So far, touch wood, I have apparently avoided it. I think I've fought something off. I've been feeling a little bit meh, but then I always feel a little bit sinusy as soon as the seasons turn. But yes, and I had a really rough week last week. Won't go into details. Just emotionally a very difficult week. So and I was going to stream, and then something else happened when I was already in a bad emotional state, and it was like, oh yeah, no, I'm definitely not streaming tonight. But yes, I am feeling slightly less sad this week, so that is good. I hope you had a great time in Cologne. I did have a great time in Cologne. It's a weird city, Cologne. I feel bad saying it's not the prettiest city, because I know that the reason it's not the prettiest city is because it was all basically flattened in the war. But yeah, there's a lot of concrete in it. I did visit the cathedral, which is very extra. And William McGonagall would be so proud, because my goodness me, they've tried to fit as many buttresses as they possibly could on that cathedral. It is Buttress City. It is ridiculous. You do not need that sheer number of buttresses. It is quite silly. Just everybody with McGonagall. Nice. But yes, it is a very big, very gothic, very over the top, and not necessarily the prettiest of cathedrals. But I do love the fact that the sunglasses on the McGonagall thing are just a little bit off. It just kind of looks like he's put them on his forehead and they've just sort of slipped down a bit. It is very on brand, I feel. But yeah, Cologne was fun. I found I googled various places to have food, because that's the kind of person I am, before I went, and there was a bakery that was kind of recommended as kind of a really good traditional German bakery, and oh my goodness me, I had a bun there. For any of you people in chat who are German or know things about personality type has food, precisely, who know things about German baking, I guess, can someone explain to me what a bobbers is? Bobbes, bobbers. They seem like a type of bun, but they're almost like Stollen. Oh my goodness me. they're weighty. I had one of them and I was like, oh, I'm gonna have one of these again. This is amazing. You live in the city that was built from old cityscapes, and your old town comes from the 50s, technically. Oh wow, okay. But yes, Cologne was fun. Cologne just makes you think of some pretty bottles you found. Nice. Okay. But yeah, when I went, the Cologne Marathon was on, so it was absolutely heaving. It was very, very busy. But I'm back again next week because we had to fit in another rehearsal. Having Googled Bobbers, you want one. I know, right? They're lethal, but amazing. They're so good. But yes, and then I'm back there again in pretty much most of November. But yeah, Bobbers are good. I also had an ice cafe because it was 27 degrees in October. Why? Climate change is definitely not a thing. Global warming ain't happening. 27 degrees in October. Bloody ridiculous. Excessive, I agree. It's 28 there, so oof. Yeah, it's not great when you're in like the second week of October and it's still warm. Yeah, not good. Still 25 at temp. Blimey. Oof. Yeah, bit worrying. Just a smidge. But yeah, Cologne's cool. It still baffles me. I will complain at all of you Europeans because there's me thinking. So I left at like, I think my train was at like, well, my flight was about 1. Train was about sort of 10ish. Walked to the train station, which was about half an hour. But anyway, I was like, I found a really nice place that did really good coffee. Like honestly, one of the best flat whites I've ever had. The day before I was due to leave, and I was like, oh, that's fine, that's great. They open at 8 on the day I need to leave. I've got plenty of time. I can pop there just after they open, like 8:30, 9, something like that. Grab a coffee, and then I can head to the station. You Europeans lie. It said it was open at 8. It said on the website it was open at 8. It said on Google it was open at 8. It even said on the door that it was open at 8. I got there at 9. Lights were off, doors were closed, nobody was in. Why does nothing wake up until 10? Why? I wish for a coffee. I was very grumpy that morning. I really was. Yeah, but it's very interesting to me that hasn't sort of the kind of starting late but going on late. Like people were still eating outside of restaurants and stuff at like 11 p.m. So yeah, so it's like it's interesting that I suppose that hasn't come over the channel because we're just generally everything's a bit colder here, both in manners and also climate. But yeah, like we only, I think after COVID, when everybody sort of started eating outside a little bit more because of, you know, health and safety reasons, have like cafes, restaurants and stuff actually put a little bit more outside seating around. But even then, like people aren't eating at like 11 o'clock at night over here. But it's really interesting to me that that's very much seems like a European thing that hasn't found its way over the channel. Because yeah, I was walking around like 8:30 in the morning to rehearsal, and the nightclubs were still like open, and people were just about like trickling out. I was like, bloody hell! How do you guys get anything done? Do you just not sleep? So yeah, having dinner at like 10:30 p.m. Yeah, you see, in theory, I like that, but also I get hungry, and that's too late for me. Like I prefer to have a bigger gap between eating and sleeping. Personal circumstances do happen. That is true. So it might have been that that there was something like stopping them opening. But looking at like all of the other shops around that also weren't open, even though they said that they were open at 8 a.m., it's like. No, I think this is a European thing. It's like we say we're open then, but everybody who lives locally knows that that's not the case. It's only you idiot people who are coming from other places who think that we actually do what we say. 'Cause yeah, Whereas things in London, for example, like most of the Prets in London open at like 7:30. So yeah, it's interesting. Also, good time zone, Ray Tracer. Welcome in. You just missed my very long rant about opening times in European coffee shops. But yeah, it was a bit of a pain because the hotel I was at was kind of comprised of two buildings, and you had to like walk out of one to go. The one I was in, you had to walk out of and then walk all the way round, like a 5-minute walk to the other entrance to even then get up into the lift and go to the like hotel restaurant for like breakfast or something. So I was like, I'm probably not going to have time to do that, so I shall walk. Because it was like a 25-minute walk to where I was rehearsing. So I was like, I'll grab something on the way. That usually works. That usually works in the UK. But it doesn't in Europe, apparently, because nowhere's bloody open. So I turned up to rehearsal. I was like, I haven't had breakfast. So, yes. I have now learnt. I will correct this mistake. You can always catch the rant on the VOD. Yeah, sure. It wasn't. French boulangeries are open at 7, otherwise people riot. Well, that's good information. Thank you, Llama. Thank you, Llama. Why did I sound very Russian there? Wow, these Brits are so hangry. I mean, yeah. Have you met a Brit? Constantly hangry. Work too hard, eat too little. Think we're doing the good things, and turns out we're not. But yes! Now I have ranted. Also, anyone here who follows me on Instagram may have seen the absolute monster of an instrument I have been lent for this project in Germany. It's a double-bell trumpet. It is insane and very heavy, but so much fun. It is very silly. Yes, I do enjoy. Sadly, it is not mine, and I can't steal it. It is amazing. It's great. But yeah, when you have to support the entire weight of basically almost 2 trumpets on one hand, that most of the weight is on your like knuckle of your little finger, I'm already starting to build up a callus there. Like it's not the most comfortable. You can get like little support harness type things for it, but I have to like change instruments a bit, so that would be a bit impractical. Twice the doots, twice the fun. Precisely. Twice the doots, twice the mutes as well. But yes, we are carrying on, as you all well know, with the non-spooky A Tale of Two Cities. Last time, where we left off, our sort of hero, slight fool, Charles Darnay, decided that it would be the best idea he's ever had to go to Paris. Yep, as an émigré. Double yep. And therefore has been chucked in a prison. And decisions were made. They were. And his father-in-law, who is an ex-Bastille prisoner, therefore kind of like hero of the people at the moment, has kind of petitioned for him. Decisions were made, most of them bad, precisely. He has petitioned for him and got him released for like an hour. Because as soon as he was released, he was arrested again. And it was all like, oh no, why has he been arrested? What's going on? And then we find out that John Barsad, Mr. Spy, who has kind of been spying for both sides, a bit of a double agent. I think he's now officially on. I think he's now on the French side. I'm not 100% sure. Like on the side of the people, because if you're not on the side of the people, you're kind of screwed. He has sort of pulled some strings and made it so that Charles Darnay has to be arrested again. And then Sidney Carton just turns up because he's here now. We've got to get all the cast over to France. And Sidney Carton has just been doing possibly the best bit of like almost James Bond-esque spy banter in any of Dickens, where he has just laid out his metaphorical hand of cards, saying, this is what I've got on you, mate. What have you got on me? Oh, wait, you got nothing. So basically blackmailing him. And that's kind of where we are. Lurk time, lurk away. So yeah, if we're all comfortable. Ooh, actually, Sam, could we possibly get a link? I completely forgot to put a link up. We're on book 3, chapter 9. Sam or someone. I would look it up, but I have so many flipping tabs open on my PC at the moment. It's quite ridiculous. I really need to close some of them. Thunder! Oh yes, I forgot to thank everybody for subbing. Yes, thank you, Lady Mephistopheles. A whole year? Blimey. Thank you very much. Parola, you have a button too. You do. This is true. You don't have as many months? That does not matter. We are still incredibly grateful. And Thunder. Oh my goodness me. 25 months in a row. Just over 2 years. Blimey. Welcome in. Woo to you too. I hope you are well. Let me just quickly... A Tale of Two Cities. Doopy-doo. Skippity-bop. See if I can beat... I probably... Andy Pants. I would be very surprised if not. Chapter... Sorry, I think I've got it. Let me know if that takes you to chapter 9, everybody. That should take you to chapter 9. It does take you to chapter 9. Hurrah. Marvellous. You're on a call. Oh, no worries. Sorry. It's not expected that you're doing it. You're just very good at beating me to find things. Amazing how the lightning effect went off just as you said thunder. Yes, that was... Yeah. Thunder is still, like, the most appropriate subscriber in terms of our subscription alert. Every time it's like, oh, marriage made in heaven, absolutely perfect. Right, well, I will stop wittering. If we're all sitting comfortably, if we all have some kind of, I don't know, hot beverage, because it's, well, actually maybe not. Always makes you smile, Thunder? Good. I am glad. Completely coincidental, but very appropriate. Yeah, hope you're all cosy and ready to hear some more. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Book 3, Chapter 9. The Game Made. While Sidney Carton and the sheep of the prisons were in the adjoining dark room, speaking so low that not a sound was heard, Mr. Lorry looked at Jerry in considerable doubt and mistrust. That honest tradesman's manner of receiving the look did not inspire confidence. He changed the leg on which he rested, as often as if he had 50 of those limbs and were trying them all. He examined his fingernails with a very questionable closeness of attention, and whenever Mr. Lorry's eye caught his, he was taken with that peculiar kind of short cough requiring the hollow of a hand before it, which is seldom, if ever, known to be an infirmity attendant on perfect openness of character. "Jerry," said Mr. Lorry, "come here." Mr. Cruncher came forward sideways, with one of his shoulders in advance of him. "What have you been, besides a messenger?" After some cogitation, accompanied with an intent look at his patron, Mr. Cruncher conceived the luminous idea of replying, "Agricultural character." "My mind misgives me much," said Mr. Lorry, angrily shaking a forefinger at him, "that you have used the respectable and great house of Tellson's as a blind, and that you have had an unlawful occupation of an infamous description. If you have, don't expect me to befriend you when you get back to England. If you have, don't expect me to keep your secret. Tellson's shall not be imposed upon." "I hope, sir," pleaded the abashed Mr. Cruncher, "that a gentleman like yourself, what I've had the honour of odd jobbing till I'm grey at it, would think twice about harming of me, even if it was so. I don't say it is, but even if it was. And which it is to be took into account that if it was, it wouldn't even then be all on one side. There'd be 2 sides to it. There might be medical doctors at the present hour a-picking up their guineas where an honest tradesman don't pick up his fardens. Fardens! No, nor yet his half-fardens. No, nor yet his quarter. A banking away like smoke at Tellson's, and a cocking their medical eyes at that tradesman on the sly, a going in and going out to their own carriages, equally like smoke, if not more so. Well, that 'ud be imposing too on Tellson's. For you cannot sarse the goose and not the gander. And here's Mrs. Cruncher, or leastways was in the old England times, and would be tomorrow if cause given a flopping again the business to that degree as is ruinating, stark ruinating. Whereas them medical doctors' wives don't flop, catch 'em at it. Or if they flop, their floppings goes in favour of more patients. And how can you rightly have one without t'other? Then, what with undertakers, and what with parish clerks, and what with sextons, and what with private watchmen, all avaricious and all in it, a man wouldn't get much by it, even it was so. And what little a man did get would never prosper with him, Mr. Lorry. He'd never have no good of it. He'd want all along to be out of the line if he could see his way out, being once in, even if it was so. Ugh! Cried Mr. Lorry, rather relenting nevertheless. I'm shocked at the sight of you. Now, what I would humbly offer to you, sir, pursued Mr. Cruncher, even if it was so, which I don't say it is. Don't prevaricate, said Mr. Lorry. No, I will not, sir, returned Mr. Cruncher, as if nothing were further from his thoughts or practice. Which I don't say it is. What I would humbly offer to you, sir, would be this. Upon that there stool at that there bar sets that there boy of mine, brought up and growed up to be a man, what will errand you, message you, general light job you, till your heels is where your head is, if such should be your wishes. If it was so, which I still don't say it is, for I will not prevaricate to you, sir, let that there boy keep his father's place, and take care of his mother. Don't blow upon that boy's father, do not do it, sir, and let that father go into the line of the regular digging, and make amends for what he would have undug, if it was so, by digging of 'em in with a will, and with conwictions respecting the future keeping of 'em safe. That, Mr. Lorry, said Mr. Cruncher, wiping his forehead with his arm as an announcement that he had arrived at the peroration of his discourse, is what I would respectfully offer to you, sir. A man don't see all this here going on dreadful round him in the way of subjects without heads, dear me, plentiful enough for to bring the price down to porterage, and hardly that without having a serious thoughts of things. And these here would be mine, if it was so, entreating of you for to bear in mind that what I said just now, I up and said in the good cause, when I might have kept it back. That at least is true, said Mr. Lorry. Say no more now. It may be that I shall yet stand your friend, if you deserve it, and repent in action, not in words. I want no more words. Mr. Cruncher knuckled his forehead as Sidney Carton and the spy returned from the dark room. Adieu, Mr. Barsad, said the former. Our arrangement thus made, you have nothing to fear from me. He sat down in a chair on the hearth, over against Mr. Lorry. When they were alone, Mr. Lorry asked him what he had done. Not much. If it should go ill with the prisoner, I have ensured access to him, once. Mr. Lorry's countenance fell. It is all I could do, said Carton. To propose too much would be to put this man's head under the axe, and, as he himself said, nothing worse could happen to him if he were denounced. It was obviously the weakness of the position. There is no help for it. But access to him, said Mr. Lorry, if it should go ill before the tribunal, will not save him. I never said it would. Mr. Lorry's eyes gradually sought the fire. His sympathy with his darling and the heavy disappointment of this second arrest gradually weakened them. He was an old man now, overborne with anxiety of late, and his tears fell. "You are a good man and a true friend," said Carton in an altered voice. "Forgive me if I notice that you are affected. I could not see my father weep and sit by careless, and I could not respect your sorrow more if you were my father. You are free from that misfortune, however." Though he said the last words with a slip into his usual manner, there was a true feeling and respect, both in his tone and in his touch, that Mr. Lorry, who had never seen the better side of him, was wholly unprepared for. He gave him his hand, and Carton gently pressed it. "To return to poor Darnay," said Carton, "don't tell her of this interview, or this arrangement. It would not enable her to go to see him. She might think it was contrived, in case of the worst, to convey to him the means of anticipating the sentence." Mr. Lorry had not thought of that, and he looked quickly at Carton to see if it were in his mind. It seemed to be. He returned the look, and evidently understood it. "She might think 1,000 things," Carton said, "and any of them would only add to her trouble. Don't speak of me to her. As I said to you when I first came, I had better not see her. I can put my hand out to do any little helpful work for her that my hand can find to do without that. You are going to her, I hope? She must be very desolate tonight." "I am going now, directly." "I am glad of that. She has such a strong attachment to you, and reliance on you. How does she look?" "Anxious and unhappy, but very beautiful." "Ah." It was a long, grieving sound, like a sigh, almost like a sob. It attracted Mr. Lorry's eyes to Carton's face, which was turned to the fire. A light, or a shade, the old gentleman could not have said which, passed from it as swiftly as a change will sweep over a hillside on a wild, bright day, and he lifted his foot to put back one of the little flaming logs which was tumbling forward. He wore the white riding-coat and top-boots then in vogue, and the light of the fire touching their light surfaces made him look very pale, with his long brown hair all untrimmed hanging loose about him. His indifference to fire was sufficiently remarkable to elicit a word of remonstrance from Mr. Lorry. His boot was still upon the hot embers of the flaming log when it had broken under the weight of his foot. "I forgot it," he said. Mr. Lorry's eyes were again attracted to his face. Taking note of the wasted air which clouded the naturally handsome features, and having the expression of prisoners' faces fresh in his mind, he was strongly reminded of that expression. "And your duties here have drawn to an end, sir?" said Carton, turning to him. "Yes. As I was telling you last night when Lucy came in so unexpectedly, I have at length done all that I can do here. I hoped to have left them in perfect safety and then to have quitted Paris. I have my leave to pass. I was ready to go." They were both silent. "Yours is a long life to look back upon, sir?" said Carton wistfully. "I am in my 78th year." "You have been useful all your life, steadily and constantly occupied, trusted, respected, and looked up to?" "I have indeed been a man of business ever since I have been a man. Indeed, I may say that I was a man of business when a boy." "See what a place you fill at 78. How many people will miss you when you leave it empty?" A solitary old bachelor, answered Mr. Lorry, shaking his head. There is nobody to weep for me. How can you say that? Wouldn't she weep for you? Wouldn't her child? Yes. Oh, yes, thank God. I didn't mean quite what I said. It is a thing to thank God for, is it not? Surely. If you could say with truth to your own solitary heart tonight, I have secured to myself the love and attachment, the gratitude or respect of no human creature. I have won myself a tender place in no regard. I have done nothing good or serviceable to be remembered by. Your 78 years would be 78 heavy curses, would they not? You say truly, Mr. Carton. I think they would be. Sidney turned his eyes again upon the fire, and, after a silence of a few moments, said, I should like to ask you, does your childhood seem far off? Do the days when you sat at your mother's knee seem days of very long ago? Responding to his softened manner, Mr. Lorry answered, 20 years back, yes. At this time of my life, no. For as I draw closer and closer to the end, I travel in the circle nearer and nearer to the beginning. It seems to be one of the kind smoothings and preparings of the way. My heart is touched now by many remembrances that had long fallen asleep, of my pretty young mother, and I so old, and by many associations of the days when what we call the world was not so real with me, and my faults were not confirmed in me. I understand the feeling, exclaimed Carton with a bright flush. And you are the better for it? I hope so. Carton terminated the conversation here by rising to help him on with his outer coat. But you, said Mr. Lorry, reverting to the theme, you are young. Yes, said Carton. I'm not old, but my young way was never the way to age. Enough of me. And of me, I am sure, said Mr. Lorry. Are you going out? I'll walk with you to her gate. You know my vagabond and restless habits. If I should prowl about the streets a long time, don't be uneasy. I shall reappear in the morning. You go to the court tomorrow? Yes, unhappily. I shall be there, but only as one of the crowd. My spy will find a place for me. Take my arm, sir. Mr. Lorry did so, and they went downstairs and out in the streets. A few minutes brought them to Mr. Lorry's destination. Carton left him there, but lingered at a little distance, and turned back to the gate again when it was shut, and touched it. He had heard of her going to the prison every day. She came out here, he said, looking about him. Turned this way, must have trod on these stones often. Let me follow in her steps. It was 10 o'clock at night when he stood before the prison of La Force, where she had stood hundreds of times. A little wood sawyer, having closed his shop, was smoking his pipe at the shop door. Good night, citizen, said Sidney Carton, pausing in going by, for the man eyed him inquisitively. Good night, citizen. How goes the Republic? You mean the guillotine? Not ill. 63 today. We shall mount to 100 soon. Samson and his men complain sometimes of being exhausted. Ha ha! He is so droll, that Samson. Such a barber. Do you go often to see him? Shave? Always. Every day. What a barber. You have seen him at work? Never. Go and see him when he has a good batch. Figure this to yourself, citizen. He shaved the 63 today in less than 2 pipes. Less than 2 pipes. Word of honour. As the grinning little man held out the pipe he was smoking to explain how he timed the execution, Carton was so sensible of a rising desire to strike the life out of him that he turned away. "But you are not English," said the wood sawyer, "though you wear English dress." "Yes," said Carton, pausing again and answering over his shoulder. "You speak like a Frenchman." "I am an old student here." "Ah, perfect Frenchman. Good night, Englishman." "Good night, citizen." "But go and see that droll dog," the little man persisted, calling after him, "and take a pipe with you." Sidney had not gone far out of sight when he stopped in the middle of the street under a glimmering lamp and wrote with his pencil on a scrap of paper. Then, traversing with the decided step of one who remembered the way well several dark and dirty streets, much dirtier than usual, for the best public thoroughfares remained uncleansed in those times of terror, he stopped at a chemist's shop, which the owner was closing with his own hands. A small, dim, crooked shop, kept in a tortuous, upheld thoroughfare by a small, dim, crooked man. Giving this citizen too good night as he confronted him at his counter, he laid the scrap of paper before him. "Whew!" the chemist whistled softly as he read it. "Hi, hi, hi!" Sidney Carton took no heed, and the chemist said, "For you, citizen?" "For me." "You will be careful to keep them separate, citizen. You know the consequences of mixing them." "Perfectly." Certain small packets were made and given to him. He put them, one by one, in the breast of his inner coat, counted out the money for them, and deliberately left the shop. "There is nothing more to do," said he, glancing upward at the moon, "until tomorrow. I can't sleep." It was not a reckless manner, the manner in which he said these words aloud under the fast-sailing clouds, nor was it more expressive of negligence than defiance. It was the settled manner of a tired man who had wandered and struggled and got lost, but who at length struck into his road and saw its end. Long ago, when he had been famous among his earliest competitors as a youth of great promise, he had followed his father to the grave. His mother had died years before. These solemn words, which had been read at his father's grave, arose in his mind as he went down the dark streets, among the heavy shadows, with the moon and the clouds sailing on high above him. "I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die." In a city dominated by the axe, alone at night, with natural sorrow rising in him for the 63 who had been that day put to death, and for tomorrow's victims then awaiting their doom in the prisons, and still of tomorrows and tomorrows, the chain of association that brought the words home, like a rusty old ship's anchor from the deep, might have been easily found. He did not seek it, but repeated them and went on. With a solemn interest in the lighted windows where the people were going to rest, forgetful through a few calm hours of the horrors surrounding them, in the towers of the churches where no prayers were said, for the popular revulsion had even travelled that length of self-destruction from years of priestly impostors, plunderers and profligates, in the distant burial places, reserved, as they wrote upon the gates, for eternal sleep, in the abounding jails, and in the streets along which the 60s rolled to a death which had become so common and material that no sorrowful story of a haunting spirit ever arose among the people out of all the working of the guillotine. With a solemn interest in the whole life and death of the city settling down to its short nightly pause in fury, Sidney Carton crossed the Seine again for the lighter streets. Few coaches were abroad, for riders in coaches were liable to be suspected, and gentility hid its head in red nightcaps and put on heavy shoes and trudged. But the theatres were all well filled, and the people poured cheerfully out as he passed, and went chatting home. At one of the theatre doors there was a little girl with a mother, looking for a way across the street through the mud. He carried the child over, and before the timid arm was loosed from his neck, asked her for a kiss. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Now that the streets were quiet and the night wore on, the words were in the echoes of his feet and were in the air. Perfectly calm and steady, he sometimes repeated them to himself as he walked, but he heard them always. The night wore out, and as he stood upon the bridge listening to the water as it splashed the river walls of the island of Paris, where the picturesque confusion of houses and cathedral shone bright in the light of the moon, the day came coldly, looking like a dead face out of the sky. Then the night, with the moon and the stars, turned pale and died, and for a little while it seemed as if creation were delivered over to death's dominion. But the glorious sun, rising, seemed to strike those words, that burden of the night, straight and warm to his heart in its long bright rays. And, looking along them, with reverently shaded eyes, a bridge of light appeared to span the air between him and the sun, while the river sparkled under it. The strong tide, so swift, so deep and certain, was like a congenial friend in the morning stillness. He walked by the stream, far from the houses, and in the light and warmth of the sun fell asleep on the bank. When he awoke and was afoot again, he lingered there yet a little longer, watching an eddy that turned and turned purposeless until the stream absorbed it and carried it on to the sea. Like me. A trading boat, with a sail of the softened colour of a dead leaf, then glided into his view, floated by him, and died away. As its silent track in the water disappeared, the prayer that had broken up out of his heart for a merciful consideration of all his poor blindnesses and errors ended in the words, I am the resurrection and the life. Mr. Lorry was already out when he got back, and it was easy to surmise where the good old man had gone. Sydney Carton drank nothing but a little coffee, ate some bread, and, having washed and changed to refresh himself, went out to the place of trial. The court was all astir and abuzz when the black sheep, whom many fell away from in dread, pressed him into an obscure corner among the crowd. Mr. Lorry was there, and Dr. Manette was there. She was there, sitting beside her father. When her husband was brought in, she turned a look upon him so sustaining, so encouraging, so full of admiring love and pitying tenderness, yet so courageous for his sake, that it called the healthy blood into his face, brightened his glance, and animated his heart. If there had been any eyes to notice the influence of her look on Sydney Carton, it would have been seen to be the same influence exactly. Before that unjust tribunal, there was little or no order of procedure, ensuring to any accused person any reasonable hearing. There could have been no such revolution if all laws, forms, and ceremonies had not first been so monstrously abused that the suicidal vengeance of the revolution was to scatter them all to the winds. Every eye was turned to the jury. The same determined patriots and good republicans as yesterday and the day before, and tomorrow and the day after. Eager and prominent among them, one man with a craving face, and his fingers perpetually hovering about his lips, whose appearance gave great satisfaction to the spectators. A life-thirsting, cannibal-looking, bloody-minded juryman, the Jacques III of Saint-Antoine. The whole jury as a jury of dogs impanelled to try the deer. Every eye then turned to the 5 judges and the public prosecutor. No favourable leaning in that quarter today. A fell, uncompromising, murderous business meaning there. Every eye then sought some other eye in the crowd and gleamed at it approvingly, and heads nodded at one another before bending forward with a strained attention. Charles Evrémonde, called Darnay, released yesterday, reaccused and retaken yesterday. Indictment delivered to him last night. Suspected and denounced enemy of the Republic. Aristocrat, one of a family of tyrants, one of a race prescribed for that they had used their abolished privileges to the infamous oppression of the people. Charles Evrémonde, called Darnay, in right of such prescription, absolutely dead in law. To this effect, in as few or fewer words, the public prosecutor. The President asked, was the accused openly denounced or secretly? Openly, President. By whom? 3 voices. Ernst Defarge, wine vendor of Saint-Antoine. Good. Thérèse Defarge, his wife. Good. Alexandre Manette, physician. A great uproar took place in the court, and in the midst of it Dr. Manette was seen, pale and trembling, standing where he had been seated. President, I indignantly protest to you that this is a forgery and a fraud. You know the accused to be the husband of my daughter. My daughter and those dear to her are far dearer to me than my life. Who and where is the false conspirator who says that I denounce the husband of my child? Citizen Manette, be tranquil. To fail in submission to the authority of the tribunal would be to put yourself out of law. As to what is dearer to you than life, nothing can be so dear to a good citizen as the Republic. Loud acclamations hailed this rebuke. The President rang his bell, and with warmth resumed. If the Republic should demand of you the sacrifice of your child herself, you would have no duty but to sacrifice her. Listen to what is to follow. In the meanwhile, be silent. Frantic acclamations were again raised. Dr. Manette sat down, with his eyes looking round and his lips trembling. His daughter drew closer to him. The craving man of the jury rubbed his hands together and restored the usual hand to his mouth. Defarge was produced when the court was quiet enough to admit of his being heard, and rapidly expounded the story of the imprisonment, and of his having been a mere boy in the doctor's service, and of the release, and of the state of the prisoner when released and delivered to him. This short examination followed, for the court was quick with its work. You did good service at the taking of the Bastille, citizen? I believe so. Here an excited woman screeched from the crowd, You were one of the best patriots there. Why not say so? You were a cannoneer that day there, and you were among the first to enter the accursed fortress when it fell. Patriots, I speak the truth. It was the Vengeance, who, amidst the warm commendations of the audience, thus assisted the proceedings. The President rang his bell, but the Vengeance, warming with encouragement, shrieked, I defy that bell! Wherein she was likewise much commended. Inform the tribunal of what you did that day within the Bastille, citizen. I knew, said Defarge, looking down at his wife, who stood at the bottom of the steps on which he was raised, looking steadily up at him. I knew that this prisoner, of whom I speak, had been confined in a cell known as 105 North Tower. I knew it from himself. He knew himself by no other name than 105 North Tower when he made shoes under my care. As I serve my gun that day, I resolve, when the place shall fall, to examine that cell. It falls. I mount to the cell with a fellow citizen who is one of the jury, directed by a jailer. I examine it very closely. In a hole in the chimney, where a stone has been worked out and replaced, I find a written paper. This is that written paper. I have made it my business to examine some specimens of the writing of Dr. Manette. This is the writing of Dr. Manette. I confide this paper in the writing of Dr. Manette to the hands of the President. Let it be read. In a dead silence and stillness, the prisoner under trial looking lovingly at his wife only looking from him to look with solicitude at her father, Dr. Manette keeping his eyes fixed on the reader, Madame Defarge never taking hers from the prisoner, Defarge never taking his from his feasting wife, and all the other eyes there intent upon the doctor, who saw none of them, the paper was read as follows. And there we shall take a break. Dun dun dun, and we shall find out what the paper said after the break. I'm sure everything is fine. Everything is fine. It's all good. But yes, go have a break. Go do break-related things, and we shall be back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. Hello, welcome back everybody. Apologies if that was a bit of a longer break than usual. I was making myself a lemon and honey, and don't have any honey that's not kind of congealed, well not congealed, but you know, crystallized. So had to make warm that up to make it actually runny again. But yes, hope we're all doing well. Hope you've all had a good break. Done break-related things, as we say. I now have slightly sticky hands because of honey, but we shall see. They're not too sticky, hopefully. Honey and lemon is always good. I would agree. Yeah. I took a choir rehearsal yesterday, so there was a lot of both singing and attempting to talk over lots of people. So voice is a little bit some ginger to it, and chef's kiss. Yeah, I would, but the ginger is currently at the bottom of the fruit and veg drawer. So you forgot you meant to reread a bit that you missed. Oh no, whoops. It's all right. I'm sure everything will be fine and work out okay. So if we're all sitting, yes, if we're all sitting comfortably, shall we find out what is in this letter apparently written by Dr. Manette? Are we all ready for some hard truths in it? No, probably not. What chapter are we going from? Well, chapter 10. We only got through one chapter there. You're on the edge of your metaphorical seat. Ooh! You're not ready. Oh, no one's ready. But yes, we're on book 3, chapter 10. But yes, let us continue. Do you want to pin? Oh, Sam's pinning it. Cool. Chapter 10. The Substance of the Shadow. I, Alexandra Manette, unfortunate physician, native of Beauvais, and afterwards resident in Paris, write this melancholy paper in my doleful cell in the Bastille during the last month of the year 1767. I write it at stolen intervals, under every difficulty. I design to secrete it in the wall of the chimney, where I have slowly and laboriously made a place of concealment for it. Some pitying hand may find it there, when I and my sorrows are dust. These words are formed by the rusty iron point with which I write with difficulty in scrapings of soot and charcoal from the chimney, mixed with blood, in the last month of the 10th year of my captivity. Hope has quite departed from my breast. I know from terrible warnings I have noted in myself that my reason will not long remain unimpaired, but I solemnly declare that I am at this time in the possession of my right mind, that my memory is exact and circumstantial, and that I write the truth as I shall answer for these my last recorded words, whether they be ever read by men or not, at the eternal judgment seat. One cloudy moonlit night, in the 3rd week of December, I think the 22nd of the month, in the year 1757, I was walking on a retired part of the quay by the Seine for the refreshment of the frosty air, at an hour's distance from my place of residence in the street of the School of Medicine, when a carriage came along behind me, driven very fast. As I stood aside to let that carriage pass, apprehensive that it might otherwise run me down, a head was put out at the window, and a voice called to the driver to stop. The carriage stopped as soon as the driver could rein in his horses, and the same voice called to me by my name. I answered. The carriage was then so far in advance of me that 2 gentlemen had time to open the door and alight before I came up with it. I observed that they were both wrapped in cloaks, and appeared to conceal themselves. As they stood side by side near the carriage door, I also observed that they both looked of about my own age, or rather younger, and that they were greatly alike in stature, manner, voice, and, as far as I could see, face too. "You are Dr. Manette?" said one. "I am." "Dr. Manette, formerly of Beauvais," said the other. "The young physician, originally an expert surgeon, who within the last year or 2 has made a rising reputation in Paris?" "Gentlemen," I returned, "I am that Dr. Manette of whom you speak so graciously." "We have been to your residence," said the first, "and not being so fortunate as to find you there, and being informed that you were probably walking in this direction, we followed in the hope of overtaking you. Will you please to enter the carriage?" The manner of both was imperious, and they both moved as these words were spoken, so as to place me between themselves and the carriage door. They were armed. I was not. "Gentlemen," said I, "pardon me, but I usually inquire who does me the honour to seek my assistance, and what is the nature of the case to which I am summoned?" The reply to this was made by him who had spoken second. "Doctor, your clients are people of condition. As to the nature of the case, our confidence in your skill assures us that you will ascertain it for yourself better than we can describe it. Enough. Will you please to enter the carriage?" I could do nothing but comply, and I entered it in silence. They both entered after me, the last springing in after putting up the steps. The carriage turned about and drove on at its former speed. I repeat this conversation exactly as it occurred. I have no doubt that it is, word for word, the same. I describe everything exactly as it took place, constraining my mind not to wander from the task. When I make the broken marks that follow here, I leave off for the time and put my paper in its hiding place. The carriage left the streets behind, passed the North Barrier, and emerged upon the country road. At 2/3 of a league from the barrier, I did not estimate the distance at that time, but afterwards when I traversed it, it stuck out of the main avenue and presently stopped at a solitary house. We all three alighted and walked by a damp, soft footpath in a garden where a neglected fountain had overflowed, to the door of a house. It was not opened immediately, in answer to the ringing of the bell, and one of my 2 conductors struck the man who opened it with his heavy riding glove across the face. There was nothing in this action to attract my particular attention, for I had seen common people struck more commonly than dogs. But the other of the 2, being angry likewise, struck the man in like manner with his arm. The look and bearing of the brothers were then so exactly alike that I then first perceived them to be twin brothers. From the time of our alighting at the outer gate, which we found locked, and which one of the brothers had opened to admit us and had relocked, I had heard cries proceeding from an upper chamber. I was conducted to this chamber straight, the cries growing louder as we ascended the stairs, and I found a patient in a high fever of the brain, lying on a bed. The patient was a woman of great beauty, and young, assuredly not much past 20. Her hair was torn and ragged, and her arms were bound to her sides with sashes and handkerchiefs. I noticed that these bonds were all portions of a gentleman's dress. On one of them, which was a fringed scarf for a dress of ceremony, I saw the armorial bearings of a noble, and the letter E. I saw this within the first minute of my contemplation of the patient, for in her restless strivings she had turned down over on her face on the edge of the bed, and had drawn the end of the scarf into her mouth, and was in danger of suffocation. My first act was to put out my hand to relieve her breathing, and in moving the scarf aside, the embroidery in the corner caught my sight. I turned her gently over, placed my hands upon her breast to calm her and keep her down, and looked into her face. Her eyes were dilated and wild, and she constantly uttered piercing shrieks, and repeated the words, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and then counted up to 12, and said, "Hush!" For an instant, and no more, she would pause to listen, and then she would repeat, and then the piercing shrieks would begin again, and she would repeat the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and would count up to 12 and say, "Hush." There was no variation in the order or the manner. There was no cessation, but the regular moment's pause in the utterance of these sounds. "How long," I asked, "has this lasted?" To distinguish the brothers, I will call them the elder and the younger. By the elder I mean him who exercised the most authority. It was the elder who replied, "Since about this hour last night." "She has a husband, a father, and a brother?" "A brother." "I do not address her brother?" He answered with great contempt, "No." "She has some recent association with the number 12? The younger brother impatiently rejoined, "With 12 o'clock. "See, gentlemen," said I, still keeping my hands upon her breast, "how useless I am as you have brought me. If I had known what I was coming to see, I could have come provided. As it is, time must be lost. There are no medicines to be obtained in this lonely place." The elder brother looked to the younger, who said haughtily, "There is a case of medicines here," and brought it from a closet and put it on the table. I opened some of the bottles, smelt them, and put the stoppers to my lips. If I had wanted to use anything save narcotic medicines that were poisons in themselves, I would not have administered any of those. "Do you doubt them?" asked the younger brother. "You see, monsieur, I am going to use them. I replied, and said no more. I made the patient swallow, with great difficulty, and after many efforts, the dose that I desired to give. As I intended to repeat it after a while, and as it was necessary to watch its influence, I then sat down by the side of the bed. There was a timid and suppressed woman in attendance, wife of the man downstairs, who had retreated into a corner. The house was damp and decayed, indifferently furnished, evidently recently occupied and temporarily used. Some thick old hangings had been nailed up before the windows to deaden the sound of the shrieks. They continued to be uttered in their regular succession, with the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," the counting up to 12, and "Hush!" The frenzy was so violent that I had not unfastened the bandages restraining the arms, but I had looked to them to see that they were not painful. The only spark of encouragement in the case was that my hand upon the sufferer's breast had this much soothing influence that for minutes at a time it tranquilized the figure. It had no effect upon the cries. No pendulum could be more regular. For the reason that my hand had this effect, I assume, I had sat by the side of the bed for half an hour, with the two brothers looking on, before the elder said, "There is another patient." I was startled and asked, "Is it a pressing case?" "You had better see," he carelessly answered, and took up a light. The other patient lay in a back room across a second staircase, which was a species of loft over a stable. There was a low plastered ceiling to a part of it. The rest was open to the ridge of the tiled roof, and there were beams across. Hay and straw were stored in that portion of the place, faggots for firing, and a heap of apples in sand. I had to pass through that part to get at the other. My memory is circumstantial and unshaken. I try it with these details, and I see them all in this my cell at the Bastille, near the close of the 10th year of my captivity, as I saw them all that night. On some hay on the ground, with a cushion thrown under his head, lay a handsome peasant boy, a boy of not more than 17 at the most. He lay on his back, with his teeth set, his right hand clenched on his breast, and his glaring eyes looking straight upward. I could not see where his wound was, as I kneeled on one knee over him, but I could see that he was dying of a wound from a sharp point. "I am a doctor, my poor fellow," said I. "Let me examine it." "I do not want it examined," he answered. "Let it be." It was under his hand, and I soothed him to let me move his hand away. The wound was a sword thrust, received from 20 to 24 hours before, but no skill could have saved him if it had been looked to without delay. He was then dying fast. As I turned my eyes to the elder brother, I saw him looking down at this handsome boy whose life was ebbing out, as if he were a wounded bird, or hare, or rabbit, not at all as if he were a fellow creature. "How has this been done, monsieur?" said I. "A crazed young common dog, a serf, forced my brother to draw upon him, and has fallen by my brother's sword, like a gentleman." There was no touch of pity, sorrow, or kindred humanity in this answer. The speaker seemed to acknowledge that it was inconvenient to have that different order of creature dying there, and that it would have been better if he had died in the usual obscure routine of his vermin kind. He was quite incapable of any compassionate feeling about the boy, or about his fate. The boy's eyes had slowly moved to him as he had spoken, and they now slowly moved to me. "Doctor, they are very proud, these nobles, but we common dogs are proud too sometimes. They plunder us, outrage us, beat us, kill us, but we have a little pride left sometimes. She... Have you seen her, doctor?" The shrieks and the cries were audible there, though subdued by the distance. He referred to them as if she were lying in our presence. I said, "I have seen her. She is my sister, Doctor. They have had their shameful rights, these nobles, in the modesty and virtue of our sisters, many years. But we have had good girls among us. I know it, and have heard my father say so. She was a good girl. She was betrothed to a good young man, too, a tenant of his. We were all tenants of his, that man's who stands there. The other is his brother, the worst of a bad race." It was with the greatest difficulty that the boy gathered bodily force to speak, but his spirit spoke with a dreadful emphasis. "We were robbed by that man who stands there, as all we common dogs are by those superior beings. Taxed by him without mercy, obliged to work for him without pay, obliged to grind our corn at his mill, obliged to feed scores of his tame birds on our wretched crops, and forbidden for our lives to keep a single tame bird of our own. Pillaged and plundered to that degree that when we chanced to have a bit of meat, we ate it in fear, with the door barred and the shutters closed, that his people should not see it and take it from us. I say, we were so robbed and hunted and were made so poor that our father told us it was a dreadful thing to bring a child into the world, and that what we should most pray for was that our women might be barren and our miserable race die out." I had never before seen the sense of being oppressed bursting forth like a fire. I had supposed that it must be latent in the people somewhere, but I had never seen it break out until I saw it in the dying boy. "Nevertheless, Doctor, my sister married. He was ailing at that time, poor fellow, and she married her lover that she might tend and comfort him in our cottage, our dog hut, as that man would call it. She had not been married many weeks, when that man's brother saw her and admired her, and asked that man to lend her to him, for what are husbands among us? He was willing enough, but my sister was good and virtuous, and hated his brother with a hatred as strong as mine. What did the two then, to persuade her husband to use his influence with her, to make her willing?" The boy's eyes, which had been fixed on mine, slowly turned to the looker-on, and I saw in the two faces that all he said was true. The two opposing kinds of pride confronting one another I can see even in this Bastille, the gentleman's all negligent and indifference, the peasant's all trodden down sentiment and passionate revenge. "You know, Doctor, that it is among the rights of these nobles to harness us common dogs to carts and drive us. They so harnessed him and drove him. You know that it is among their rights to keep us in their grounds all night, quieting the frogs in order that their noble sleep may not be disturbed. They kept him out in those unwholesome mists at night, and ordered him back into his harness in the day. But he was not persuaded. No, taken out of harness one day at noon to feed, if he could find food, he sobbed 12 times, once for every stroke of the bell, and died on her bosom. Nothing human could have held life in the boy but his determination to tell all his wrong. He forced back the gathering shadows of death as he forced his clenched right hand to remain clenched and to cover his wound. Then, with that man's permission and even with his aid, his brother took her away, in spite of what I know she must have told his brother. And what that is will not be long unknown to you, Doctor, if it is now. His brother took her away, for his pleasure and diversion, for a little while. I saw her pass me on the road. When I took the tidings home, our father's heart burst. He never spoke one of the words that filled it. I took my young sister, for I have another, to a place beyond the reach of this man, and where, at least, she will never be his vassal. Then I tracked the brother here, and last night climbed in, a common dog, but sword in hand. Where is the loft window? It was somewhere here. The room was darkening to his sight. The world was narrowing around him. I glanced about me and saw that the hay and straw were trampled over the floor as if there had been a struggle. She heard me and ran in. I told her not to come near us till he was dead. He came in and first tossed me some pieces of money, then struck at me with a whip. But I, though a common dog, so struck at him as to make him draw. Let him break into as many pieces as he will, the sword that he stained with my common blood. He drew to defend himself, thrust at me with all his skill for life. My glance had fallen, but a few moments before, on the fragments of a broken sword lying among the hay. That weapon was a gentleman's. In another place lay an old sword that seemed to have been a soldier's. "Now lift me up, Doctor, lift me up. Where is he?" "He is not here," I said, supporting the boy, and thinking that he referred to the brother. "He? Proud as these nobles are, he is afraid to see me. Where is the man who is here? Turn my face to him." I did so, raising the boy's head against my knee. But, invested for the moment with extraordinary power, he raised himself completely, obliging me to rise too, or I could not have still supported him. "Marquis," said the boy, turned to him with his eyes opened wide and his right hand raised. "In the days when all these things are to be answered for, I summon you and yours, to the last of your bad race, to answer for them. I mark this cross of blood upon you as a sign that I do it. In the days when all these things are to be answered for, I summon your brother in the worst of the bad race to answer for them separately. I mark this cross of blood upon him as a sign that I do it." Twice he put his hand to the wound in his breast, and with his forefinger drew a cross in the air. He stood for an instant with the finger yet raised, and as it dropped, he dropped with it, and I laid him down, dead. When I returned to the bedside of the young woman, I found her raving in precisely the same order and continuity. I knew that this might last for many hours, and that it would probably end in the silence of the grave. I repeated the medicines I had given her, and I sat at the side of the bed until the night was far advanced. She never abated the piercing quality of her shrieks, never stumbled in the distinctness of the order of her words. They were always, "My husband, my father, and my brother. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Hush!" This lasted 26 hours from the time when I first saw her. I had come and gone twice, and was again sitting by her, when she began to falter. I did what little could be done to assist that opportunity, and by she sank into a lethargy, and lay like the dead. It was as if the wind and the rain had lulled at last after a long and fearful storm. I released her arms, and called the woman to assist me to compose her figure and the dress she had torn. It was then that I knew her condition to be that of one in whom the first expectations of being a mother have arisen, and it was then that I lost the little hope I had had of her. "Is she dead?" asked the Marquis, whom I will still describe as the elder brother, coming booted into the room from his horse. "Not dead," said I, "but like to die." "What strength there is in these common bodies," he said, looking down at her with some curiosity. "There is prodigious strength," I answered him, "in sorrow and despair." He first laughed at my words, and then frowned at them. He moved a chair with his foot near to mine, ordered the woman away, and said in a subdued voice, "Doctor, finding my brother in this difficulty with these hinds, I recommend that your aid should be invited. Your reputation is high, and as a young man with your fortune to make, you are probably mindful of your interest. The things that you see here are things to be seen and not spoken of. I listened to the patient's breathing and avoided answering. "Do you honour me with your attention, doctor?" "Monsieur," said I, "in my profession the communications of patients are always received in confidence." I was guarded in my answer, for I was troubled in my mind with what I had heard and seen. Her breathing was so difficult to trace that I carefully tried the pulse and the heart. There was life, and no more. Looking round as I resumed my seat, I found both the brothers intent upon me. "I write with so much difficulty. The cold is so severe. I am so fearful of being detected and consigned to an underground cell in total darkness that I must abridge this narrative. There is no confusion or failure in my memory. It can recall and could detail every word that was ever spoken between me and those brothers." She lingered for a week. Towards the last, I could understand some few syllables that she said to me by placing my ear close to her lips. She asked me where she was, and I told her. Who I was, and I told her. It was in vain that I asked her for her family name. She faintly shook her head upon the pillow and kept her secret, as the boy had done. I had no opportunity of asking her any question until I had told the brothers she was sinking fast and could not live another day. Until then, though no one was ever presented to her consciousness save the woman and myself, one or other of them had always jealously sat behind the curtain at the head of the bed when I was there. But when it came to that, they seemed careless what communication I might hold with her, as if, the thought passed through my mind, I were dying too. I always observed that their pride bitterly resented the younger brothers, as I call him, having crossed swords with a peasant, and that peasant a boy. The only consideration that appeared to affect the mind of either of them was the consideration that this was highly degrading to the family, and was ridiculous. As often as I caught the younger brother's eyes, their expression reminded me that he disliked me deeply, for knowing what I knew from the boy. He was smoother and more polite to me than the elder, but I saw this. I also saw that I was an encumbrance in the mind of the elder, too. My patient died 2 hours before midnight. At a time by my watch, answering almost to the minute when I had first seen her. I was alone with her when her forlorn young head dropped gently on one side, and all her earthly wrongs and sorrows ended. The brothers were waiting in a room downstairs, impatient to ride away. I had heard them, alone at the bedside, striking their boots with their riding whips, and loitering up and down. "At last she is dead?" said the elder when I went in. "She is dead," said I. "I congratulate you, my brother," were his words as he turned round. He had before offered me money, which I had postponed taking. He now gave me a rouleau of gold. I took it from his hand, but laid it on the table. I had considered the question, and had resolved to accept nothing. "Pray excuse me," said I. "Under the circumstances, no." They exchanged looks, but bent their heads to me as I bent mine to them, and we parted without another word on either side. I am weary, weary, weary. Worn down by misery, I cannot read what I have written with this gaunt hand. Early in the morning, the rouleau of gold was left at my door in a little box, with my name on the outside. From the first, I had anxiously considered what I ought to do. I decided that day to write privately to the minister, stating the nature of the 2 cases to which I had been summoned, and the place to which I had gone, in effect, stating all the circumstances. I knew what court influence was, and what the immunities of the nobles were, and I expected that the matter would never be heard of, but I wished to relieve my own mind. I had kept the matter a profound secret, even from my wife. And this too I resolved to state in my letter. I had no apprehension whatever of my real danger, but I was conscious that there might be real danger for others if others were compromised by possessing the knowledge that I possessed. I was much engaged that day, and could not complete my letter that night. I rose long before my usual time next morning to finish it. It was the last day of the year. The letter was lying before me just completed when I was told that a lady waited who wished to see me. I am growing more and more unequal to the task I have set myself. It is so cold, so dark, my senses are so benumbed, and the gloom upon me is so dreadful. The lady was young, engaging and handsome, but not marked for a long life. She was in great agitation. She presented herself to me as the wife of the Marquis St. Evremond. I connected the title by which the boy had addressed the elder brother with the initial letter embroidered on the scarf, and had no difficulty in arriving at the conclusion that I had seen that nobleman very lately. My memory is still accurate, but I cannot write the words of our conversation. I suspect that I am watched more closely than I was, and I know not at what times I may be watched. She had in part suspected, and in part discovered, the main facts of the cruel story, of her husband's share in it, and my being resorted to. She did not know that the girl was dead. Her hope had been, she said, in great distress, to show her in secret a woman's sympathy. Her hope had been to avert the wrath of heaven from a house that had long been hateful to the suffering many. She had reasons for believing that there was a young sister living, and her greatest desire was to help that sister. I could tell her nothing but that there was such a sister. Beyond that, I knew nothing. Her inducement to come to me, relying on my confidence, had been the hope that I could tell her the name and place of abode, whereas, to this wretched hour, I am ignorant of both. These scraps of paper fail me. One was taken from me with a warning yesterday. I must finish my record today. She was a good, compassionate lady, and not happy in her marriage. How could she be? The brother distrusted and disliked her, and his influence was all opposed to her. She stood in dread of him, and in dread of her husband too. When I handed her down to the door, there was a child, a pretty boy from 2 to 3 years old, in her carriage. "For his sake, doctor," she said, pointing to him in tears, "I would do all I can to make what poor amends I can. He will never prosper in his inheritance otherwise. I have a presentiment that if no other innocent atonement is made for this, it will one day be required of him. What I have left to call my own, it is little beyond the worth of a few jewels. I will make it the first charge of his life to bestow, with the compassion and lamenting of his dead mother, on this injured family, if the sister can be discovered." She kissed the boy, and said, caressing him, It is for thine own dear sake. Thou wilt be faithful, little Charles?" The child answered her bravely, "Yes." I kissed her hand, and she took him in her arms, and went away caressing him. I never saw her more. As she had mentioned her husband's name in the faith that I knew it, I added no mention of it to my letter. I sealed my letter, and not trusting it out of my own hands, delivered it myself that day. That night, the last night of the year, towards 9 o'clock, a man in black dress rang at my gate. demanded to see me, and softly followed my servant, Ernest Defarge, a youth, upstairs. When my servant came into the room where I sat with my wife, oh, my wife, beloved of my heart, my fair young English wife, we saw the man, who was supposed to be at the gate, standing silent behind him. An urgent case in the Rue Saint-Honoré, he said. It would not detain me. He had a coach in waiting. It brought me here. It brought me to my grave. When I was clear of the house, a black muffler was drawn tightly over my mouth from behind, and my arms were pinioned. The two brothers crossed the road from a dark corner and identified me with a single gesture. The Marquis took from his pocket the letter I had written, showed it me, burnt it in the light of a lantern that was held, and extinguished the ashes with his foot. Not a word was spoken. I was brought here. I was brought to my living grave. If it had pleased God to put it in the hard heart of either of the brothers in all these frightful years to grant me any tidings of my dearest wife, so much as to let me know by a word whether alive or dead, I might have thought that he had not quite abandoned them. But now I believe that the mark of the Red Cross is fatal to them, and that they have no part in his mercies. And them and their descendants, to the last of their race, I, Alexandre Manette, unhappy prisoner, do this last night of the year 1767, in my unbearable agony, denounce to the times when all these things shall be answered for. I denounce them to heaven and to earth. A terrible sound arose when the reading of this document was done. A sound of craving and eagerness that had nothing articulate in it but blood. The narrative called up the most revengeful passions of the time, and there was not a head in the nation but must have dropped before it. Little need, in presence of that tribunal and that auditory, to show how the Defarges had not made the paper public, with the other captured Bastille memorials borne in procession, and had kept it, biding their time. Little need to show that this detested family name had long been anathematized by Saint Antoine and was wrought into the fatal register. The man never trod ground whose virtues and services would have sustained him in that place that day against such denunciation. And all the worse for the doomed man that the denouncer was a well-known citizen, his own attached friend, the father of his wife. One of the frenzied aspirations of the populace was for imitations of the questionable public virtues of antiquity and for sacrifices and self-immolations on the people's altar. Therefore, when the president said, else had his own head quivered on his shoulders, that the good physician of the Republic would deserve better still of the Republic by rooting out an obnoxious family of aristocrats, and would doubtless feel a sacred glow and joy in making his daughter a widow and her child an orphan, there was wild excitement, patriotic fervour, not a touch of human sympathy. "Much influence around him, has that doctor?" murmured Madame Defarge, smiling to the vengeance. "Save him now, my doctor, save him." At every juryman's vote there was a roar. Another and another. Roar and roar. Unanimously voted. At heart and by descent an aristocrat. An enemy of the Republic. A notorious oppressor of the people. Back to the conciergerie, and death within 24 hours. Chapter 11. Dusk. The wretched wife of the innocent man thus doomed to die fell under the sentence as if she had been mortally stricken. But she uttered no sound, and so strong was the voice within her, representing that it was she of all the world who must uphold him in his misery and not augment it, that it quickly raised her, even from that shock. The judges having to take part in a public demonstration out of doors, the tribunal adjourned. The quick noise and movement of the court's emptying itself by many passages had not ceased when Lucie stood, stretching out her arms towards her husband, with nothing in her face but love and consolation.
"Oh, if I might touch him, if I might embrace him once! Oh, good citizens, if you would have so much compassion for us!"
There was but a jailer left, along with 2 of the 4 men who had taken him last night, and Barsad. The people had all poured out to the show in the streets. Barsad proposed to the rest, "Let her embrace him then. It is but a moment." It was silently acquiesced in, and they passed her over the seats in the hall to a raised place, where he, by leaning over the dock, could fold her in his arms. "Farewell, dear darling of my soul, my parting blessing on my love. We shall meet again, where the weary are at rest." They were her husband's words, as he held her to his bosom.
"I can bear it, dear Charles. I am supported from above. Don't suffer for me. A parting blessing for our child."
"I send it to her by you. I kiss her by you. I say farewell to her by you."
"My husband! No, a moment!"
He was tearing himself apart from her.
"We shall not be separated long. I feel that this will break my heart by and by, but I will do my duty while I can, and when I leave her, God will raise up friends for her as he did for me."
Her father had followed her, and would have fallen on his knees to both of them, but that Darnay put out a hand and seized him, crying, "No, no! What have you done? What have you done that you should kneel to us? We know now what a struggle you made of old. We know now what you underwent when you suspected my descent, and when you knew it. We know now the natural antipathy you strove against and conquered for her dear sake. We thank you with all our hearts and all our love and duty. Heaven be with you." Her father's only answer was to draw his hands through his white hair and wring them with a shriek of anguish. "It could not be otherwise," said the prisoner. "All things have worked together as they have fallen out. It was the always vain endeavour to discharge my poor mother's trust that first brought my fatal presence near you. Good could never come of such evil. A happier end was not in nature to so unhappy a beginning. Be comforted, and forgive me. Heaven bless you." As he was drawn away, his wife released him, and stood looking after him with her hands touching one another in the attitude of prayer, and with a radiant look upon her face, in which there was even a comforting smile. As he went out at the prisoner's door, she turned, laid her head lovingly on her father's breast, tried to speak to him, and fell at his feet. Then, issuing from the obscure corner from which he had never moved, Sidney Carton came and took her up. Only her father and Mr. Lorry were with her. His arm trembled as it raised her and supported her head. Yet there was an air about him that was not all of pity, that had a flush of pride in it. "Shall I take her to a coach? I shall never feel her weight." He carried her lightly to the door and laid her tenderly down in a coach. Her father and their old friend got into it, and he took his seat beside the driver. When they arrived at the gateway where he had paused in the dark not many hours before, to picture to himself on which of the rough stones of the street her feet had trodden, he lifted her again, and carried her up the staircase to their rooms. There he laid her down on a couch, where her child and Miss Pross wept over her. "Don't recall her to herself," he said softly to the latter. "She is better so. Don't revive her to consciousness while she only faints."
"Oh, Carton! Carton, dear Carton!"
cried little Lucy, springing up and throwing her arms passionately round him in a burst of grief.
"Now that you have come, I think you will do something to help Mamma, something to save Papa. Oh, look at her, dear Carton. Can you, of all the people who love her, bear to see her so?"
He bent over the child and laid her blooming cheek against his face. He put her gently from him and looked at her unconscious mother. "Before I go," he said, and paused, "I may kiss her?" It was remembered afterwards that when he bent down and touched her face with his lips, he murmured some words. The child, who was nearest to him, told them afterwards, and told her grandchildren when she was a handsome old lady, that she heard him say, "A life you love." When he had gone out into the next room, he turned suddenly on Mr. Lorry and her father, who were following, and said to the latter, "You had great influence but yesterday, Dr. Manette. Let at least be tried. These judges and all the men in power are very friendly to you, and very recognisant of your services, are they not?" "Nothing connected with Charles was concealed from me. I had the strongest assurances that I should save him, and I did." He returned the answer in great trouble, and very slowly. "Try them again. The hours between this and tomorrow afternoon are few and short, but try." "I intend to try. I will not rest a moment." "That's well. I have known such energy as yours do great things before now, though never," he added with a smile and a sigh together, "such great things as this. But try. Of little worth as life is when we misuse it, it is worth that effort. It would cost nothing to lay down if it were not." "I will go," said Dr. Manette, "to the prosecutor and the president straight, and I will go to others whom it is better not to name. I will write too, but stay! There is a celebration in the streets, and no one will be accessible until dark." "That's true. Well, it is a forlorn hope at the best, and not much the forlorner for being delayed till dark. I should like to know how you speed, though mind, I expect nothing. When are you likely to have seen these dread powers, Dr. Manette?" "Immediately after dark, I should hope, within an hour or two from this." "It will be dark soon after 4. Let us stretch the hour or two. If I go to Mr. Lorry's at 9, shall I hear what you have done, either from our friend or from yourself?" "Yes. May you prosper." Mr. Lorry followed Sidney to the outer door, and, touching him on the shoulder as he was going away, caused him to turn. "I have no hope," said Mr. Lorry, in a low and sorrowful whisper. "Nor have I. If any one of these men, or all of these men, were disposed to spare him, which is a large supposition, for what is his life or any man's to them, I doubt if they durst spare him after the demonstration in the court." "And so do I. I heard the fall of the axe in that sound." Mr. Lorry leaned his arm upon the door-post and bowed his face upon it. "Don't despond," said Carton very gently. "Don't grieve. I encouraged Dr. Manette in this idea because I felt that it might one day be consolatory to her. Otherwise she might think his life was wantonly thrown away or wasted, and that might trouble her." Yes, returned Mr. Lorry, drying his eyes. "You are right. But he will perish. There is no real hope." "Yes. He will perish. There is no real hope," echoed Carton, and walked with a settled step downstairs. And that is where we shall end for tonight. Thank you very much for listening. Does anybody want to hazard a guess at what's going to happen? Does anybody want to hazard a guess what's going to happen? Can you guess? Well, anybody who hasn't read Tale of Two Cities, gonna guess what's gonna happen. Also, Sydney Carton. Yeah, sorry Sam, you're not allowed. Sydney Carton, like, I get it. I get you're meant to be doing this whole kind of like, unrequited love, all of that, but nah, just every opportunity he has to just be a little bit creepy is. You remember no spoilers here. Okay, we're not spoiling anything. But I feel like everyone not executed would die of consumption. I mean, probably that too. It's very fashionable for the time, I hear. Also, I didn't get to say hi to you, Billiam, as you came in halfway through me reading. Hope you are well. He had a real little montage all by himself. He did, didn't he? Yeah, I know it's of its time and like, ooh, I finally get a chance with a woman when she's unconscious. Doesn't really sit well with me. Not great. Can I kiss her, he says, to her child and her, like, housemaid. Just like, not sure they're the people you need to be asking, mate. Sydney Carton's emo montage. That was pretty bleh. Yeah, I know. You didn't know if this was a live one or not. Really enjoyed it. Oh, well, I'm glad. Yeah, they're mostly alive. They're mostly alive? Yes, Sam and I are mostly alive. No, most of our streams are live. We tend to kind of flag up the ones that will be pre-recorded, but we try and make sure that most of them are live. Some of them in November might be pre-recorded because I am away. But spoilers, I know, right? Consent, not how it works. Yeah, I know. I know what Dickens is doing, and I know it's very much Dickens himself, not great with women. Didn't have the best views about them in terms of just like, again, of the time, but just, like, women are not really people, but just the bit that's like, he had a look of pride in his eyes as he supported the fainting woman. It's like, ooh, get me, look at me, I'm holding the woman I love. Yeah. It's like, dude, stop. Just stop. And he's like, I've got to sort her life out. And then, yeah, it's just like, oh, babe, sort everything out, Sydney. Please, get some therapy. Just, you have slight main character syndrome, I think. Got to be at the centre of everything. She's Sydney, potential wife, Guy Carton. Exactly. Incel Central. Very much so. Yeah, but not because, no. He's being honourable, and not pursuing her, and just being a good guy. It just a little bit ick. It was the calming patient with his hand on her breast which got me. I know, that got me too. I don't really understand. That's the thing, is like, if you put a hand on anyone's chest, regardless of gender, I wouldn't actually say that's particularly calming. Because in general, you want your chest, your rib cage to be fairly unconstricted, especially if you're in some kind of like nervous breakdown. You don't want someone even lightly like laying their hand there, because then that will feel, especially if you're in sort of a state of a state of kind of tension, hypertension, nervousness and stuff, where your breathing's going to be really constricted and everything's going to feel worse anyway. That's not going to help. Also, I don't know if you can hear this, the rain is going for it, especially after assault. Exactly. Like, she's just had a man's hands and everything all over her. She probably doesn't want another one, even if it is a doctor. Even if he means well, even if he's trying. It's like, sure, maybe like, even holding her hands a bit much. Just like, I don't know, put a weighted blanket on her or something. Calming grope, yes. It's alright, Ray Tracer. I also can't type well today. Less calming, more handsy. Yeah. Yeah, it's just like, be very careful there, Manette. You're a doctor. Yeah, so, it just happens in literature of this era that it's just like, can we not act like this around women? Women do not need to be touched all the time. Can we have something called bubbles? Can we have personal space? Can we have consent before groping someone? Please. Or even lightly touching them. And don't ask someone's I don't know how old the daughter is at this point, 6-year-old daughter, can I kiss your mother? Because, no! And yes, I did also enjoy whoever it was who said, who did say about the normal... Yes, Andy Pants, yeah. Normal child speaking in a normal way. Yeah, I do like the kind of Victorian children. I must speak like this. It is very good of you, sir, to be so lovely to my mother. I'm sure she will be fine. You are so generous. Yeah, that's definitely how kids speak. 6 going on 80, apparently. Quite absurd you're wanting them to vote next. I know. Ugh. Dreadful. Can't have women voting. Worst thing. Ugh. Don't want equal rights and stuff. Ugh. But yes, I hope you enjoyed that one. We are maybe 2 streams away from the end. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, probably about 2 or 3. So yeah. I wonder what will happen next. Can't possibly think. But yeah, thank you all very much for being here. Let us see who's on to raid. Is Stephen on? Lil Gator game, what the heck is that? We could go over to LRR. They're doing their subathon. But I think let's go visit Stephen because I wasn't here last week, so we didn't raid over to Stephen. So we're going to go over to Stephen Joyce, who is our usual Wednesday raid target because he's live and he's usually playing chilly games. Yes, Lucy, chilly games, chill games. Gordon Bennett, I'm doing well. So go on, head over to Stephen, give him our love, and yeah, thank you all very much for being here. We shall hopefully see you on Saturday with some spookums. But yeah, go take care of yourselves, and we shall see you again soon. Goodbye.